Hi, it's Raghu Markus, and this is another Mindrolling, and I have a wonderful guest today, Nancy Colier. And Nancy and I just met, and I'm going to be happy as you all out there to get to know her a little bit. She wrote an amazing book called The Power of Off, and there isn't one person amongst us that sure could use this read. I'll tell you that, Nancy. It's quite a book.
Thank you. I agree. I think we all need it.
Yeah. But I want to ask just a little bit about yourself and how, now, after reading this and, getting to know you that way, I know that you have obviously a relationship of some sort with Buddhist thought. Is that not true?
Yes, I've been a practicing Buddhist for, I don't even like the term Buddhist because it feels contrary to the practice, but I've studied and been a student of Eastern spirituality for maybe 20 years. I was also raised by, believe it or not, Buddhist parents.
Oh, wow.
So it's always been a part of my life. And it became more of a part of my life about 15, 20 years ago, became very central practice. And there's a practice called non-duality, which is a kind of form of, comes out of the Advaita tradition. And that's really my primary practice.
Uh-huh. Oh, wonderful. Well, Nancy, I have to tell you one thing before we get into, because I do want to hear a little bit more of your personal journey. But I have to say one thing about The Power of Off and your book, your new book. And that is, I had a similar experience with this book, reading this book, that I did with reading Ram Dass. I think you know who Ram Dass is. Yeah. So with reading Ram Dass.
I'm so delighted to be in the same sentence that whatever you say going forward is great.
So he wrote a book on aging. And so I remember reading the book, and everything, and a lot in the book is about how we absolutely go every which way we can to deny aging, right? Everything we do is around that. And I was with him one day. I said, Ram Dass, that book you wrote, it's just absolutely pissed me off big time, because everything you wrote in it, I'm enacting. I'm acting it out. I am so in denial, it's not even funny. Same with this book, The Power of Off, okay?
Yeah.
I go in there and, oh my God, I'm doing all the same bullshit that we are all so caught in with our technology, and particularly our phones. And like I get mad at my wife. Oh, yeah, you're way more on it than I am. You keep that thing by your bedside in the middle of the night, you're looking at the damn thing. Right. And then...
Well, she would fit in with 50% of the population sleeps with it on the pillow or in the bed under the covers, 80% of millennials. So
80.
She would be right in the norm.
Jesus. Yeah, when you look at some of the things, there's a wonderful article in the New York Times which you contributed to that I took a look at, and most people now check their smartphones 150 times a day, or every 6 minutes. Okay, when you actually look at these things,
but it's going to now every 5 minutes.
Oh, really? Is that a phenomenon with coinciding with our new president, perhaps?
Too much there to even go there. The Twitter presidency is upon us.
Yeah, really. So, all right, but let's back up a little bit. So, just in terms of it's I always love to hear from people what it is that was the real moments and events that led into a transformation out of knowing that you are your mind, your ego, and all. There is another dimension. What are some of those things? I mean, in my earliest days with this podcast, for me, it was, of course, back in the day, psychedelics, music. Those were two very powerful change organisms for me. What were the things that really defined you and led you to a path of obvious inner inquiry?
Probably what brings a lot of people to the cushion, that the strategies that I was using to find happiness were not working, and that there was this relentless belief, I suppose you could say, that there was something outside myself that would lead me to fundamental well-being. And, as a sort of type A cubed personality, I mastered everything and did everything and accomplished everything and learned everything, and still couldn't find a place where I could just settle down and be where I was. So after years and years of that, I had to start to look in a different direction. And I think I stumbled on, there are a couple poems, but one was, you're looking in 1,000 different places, and until you exhaust the moment and the looking, you'll never find refuge. And there was also the Rumi poem that was, I've been knocking all this time, only to realize I've been knocking from the inside. And a couple of spiritual teachers who, just in sitting with them, really pointed me to my own endless searching. And I remember Gangaji was one of those saying to stop the strategies. And then now I work a lot with Adyashanti and Muji, and the sense of the delight that comes, I found, in moving from contents to context, from what my mind is sort of spinning to what is it that makes me aware of what it's spinning. And just the sense of relief, maybe the first time ever, being able to be where I was, dropping the future and the past. Some great teachers, even just basic teachings like in Eckhart Tolle's book or Pema Chodron. The doorway for me was compassion, was the recognition of how much I'm struggling and trying to find refuge. So the doorway to the sense of spaciousness, to being awareness, was through kind of the heartbreak for this human struggle to try and find peace, right?
Yeah.
And my path, a lot of my path was through, I was a very high level equestrian.
Oh.
And for 25 years, I rode on the horse show circuit at a really high level. And that was my teacher. That was my teacher about learning how to be where I was, and all the good stuff that comes with that.
Yeah.
Mastery is a great Dharma doorway.
Yeah. Talk about balance, learning how to keep balance, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Keep balance and keep being a beginner, and you want to be humbled, your ego wants to be humbled. Just keep getting better, that there's no end to that. And all the lessons that we learn by being up against ourselves. So actually, my first book is called Getting Out of Your Own Way, which is about that process.
Mm. But then you did obviously changed careers,
yeah,
and moved into, I think, social work and then therapy, right?
Yes. I mean, there was a lot of crossover. I've been a therapist for a long time, but it really was a case of wanting to work with people and do awareness practices with other people and bring that, in the West, we have such a problem with self-hating, with second arrows. Everything is about becoming a better version of ourselves. So there was a great desire to offer, I suppose, what I was learning. And then, of course, in this world, this virtual world, to be seeing all the ways that we're changing as a result of the technology, and where there's hope in this, and where I'm very concerned about this, particularly raising children in this environment.
Yeah, really.
and how we can use the technology really to build awareness. We may be able to flip it and use it in a different way.
Boy, I have been talking about this off and on in podcasts that we've done with various people. Yeah, there's a lot of benefit and there's a lot of negative process as well. It's a very, very tough subject. So in the book, though, there's a few things in it that really caught my eye. That particularly, I love this chapter, when escaping the moment is the new moment. And it's not like we, as you say, it's not like we haven't, this is a tape that we run about how it is that we can escape, and you talk about boredom as well. How we can, whatever we can do to distract is what we would tend to do. But now we have the biggest potential of known to man up till now. Of course, we'll have virtual reality done quite well real soon. But talk about that, just the human condition, about how it is so difficult for us to accept settling into a spacious moment. Ram Dass, be here now, huh? I mean, that's a very difficult. It seemed like a simple thing, and that whole book turned on a generation, but it's actually extraordinarily complex and difficult. Can you talk about it a little bit?
Well, yeah, the simplest is the hardest. And for time immemorial, as you know, we have been looking for ways to outrun ourselves, to avoid ourselves, to avoid where we are, essentially. And we all have this kind of inner reptile, that wants pleasure, wants distraction, wants escape. Get me out of here, get me out of here. And it's not to judge that. That's kind of built into the human condition. Unfortunately, with technology, we are more and more experiencing ourselves as a vacuum. So where we are is nowhere. And if we are not supplemented or adding entertainment or adding stuff, data, information, something to ourselves, it's a kind of abyss. So we don't really experience ourselves anymore as a destination. That was already, as you're saying, that was already a challenge. And one of the things that, for example, we'll be walking on the street and something sweet will happen. We'll open a door for someone and we'll have one of those sweet moments. And in the past, before our addiction, we might have spent the next block or two just processing that with ourselves. Imagine, with just ourselves, not tell anyone, nothing. And now, of course, within a moment, we're on social media, hashtag sweet moment, kicking it with kindness, all about gratitude, whatever nonsense we put out there. And then we wait for the response, the thumbs ups, the likes, the so on, to tell us what that experience is supposed to mean. So again, we're like this empty vesicle waiting for content, for meaning, and that's really what's happening. Is we're not looking to ourselves anymore for meaning. Last night I asked my daughter what she wanted for dinner, and she said, "Well, let's go on Instagram and look at pictures of things." And it's just striking how the way we find well-being, the way we find peace, is by turning inward. That's what all of spiritual practice is finding oneself as the destination. And yet everything we're doing with technology is teaching us to say, well, what else? What am I missing? What else could I be doing? Anywhere but just myself. So this tool, this smartphone, this whatever screen is an ally to our fundamental fear that we, without filling, are nothing.
That's great. It's an ally to our fundamental fear, really. Oh,
yeah.
I'm writing that down, okay, because it's so great, Nancy.
Yeah. It's doing a lot of, it's striking me that our relationship with technology is really changing, not just a relationship with ourselves and with open, unfilled space. That is the dread of unfilled space, which is precisely where creativity lies and deep well-being lies. But it's also changing in a disturbing way our relationship with life itself, I would say, because we're not in the direct experience of life anymore. We go to the museum, as you know, and we don't really take in the art. We walk on a country road. We don't feel the breeze. We're not in the experience we're physically in. We are looking on that country road for a place to take a selfie of ourselves so we can say, check me out. I'm a person that takes country walks, right? So we're using life to build our brand. Life is something we just use to promote our narcissism, right? And at the same time, if we're not doing that, we're trying to capture life every minute. We're denying its ephemeral nature. We're saying, no, it doesn't come and go. I can get it in my iPhoto file. Look at that. I have life. It's right here. I pinned it down. So then I can show it to everybody. But the cost of that owning life is getting to live it when it's happening. So what I see in my practice is all these folks who are kind of waiting for their real life to start. They don't have a feeling like they've lived. They have all this proof, but they don't actually feel, they don't own the experiences cellularly. So it's a very disturbing, it's like becoming a kind of ghost in your own life. And so I would say our relationship with life, that we're actually swimming in the ocean. We're not that fish who's in a baggie inside the ocean and thinks that, life stops right here at the baggie. We're actually in the ocean and we're losing that experience.
Which leads me to, which is really a direct connection to your chapter on boredom. And what I really love, the verb to bore means to hollow out a tube or make a hole in. Right? And in digital age, we view empty space as nothingness, as death. And nothing, and a little further down, nothing to do is the most nutrient-rich food for the human imagination. I love that. And then further, a hollow is a place where a nest can be built. So how do we turn this around, this epidemic of boredom?
Well, awareness is always our entry point, right? So we have to become aware of our great fear of spaciousness, of unfilled time, of, when somebody comes in to practice with me in therapy and they don't have something immediately on the agenda, I'm delighted, because that is a space to really then find something brand new and create something brand new. But in our culture, we have to become aware that open space, we have to flip it, and just beginning to have that conversation that, like we would with our kids. Boredom is not an excuse. Well, then go find something to do. Go find something, figure it out. And we have to start posing that to adults, because adults now speak like 10-year-olds, 5 minutes, I got to kill some time. I've got to kill some time. I could play Candy Crush. I could check my email, well, what would happen? There's a lot of interesting research to show that people make big decisions in their lives, primary changes, when they are denied technology. When they get off technology, they start being able to look at the bigger issues in their lives and make fundamental changes for the better. But when we're filling every moment with distractions and, again, getting through life without having to be with ourselves, be with open space, we don't really make changes. We don't really do anything. We just sort of putter around, move the vase from this side of the table to the back and forth, and don't address kind of the bigger issues that make our lives better. So just bringing the awareness to one's attention. How are you being with open space? How are you? Are you filling your life just to get to the end of it without having to meet an empty space, that's where we have to start, because most people aren't even aware that that's how they're just acting impulsively.
Yeah, and it's a given that it's a given. This is the way we have this wonderful new technology, and now it's embedded in our lives, in our culture, and worldwide, by the way, of course. And now there's total lack of awareness. Now I've been doing practice for a long time. Went over to India with Ram Dass back in the day and met this incredible being in the blanket.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so on. Okay, so then I'm reading your book. Here I am, and just one little place. Yes, we are so afraid to just relax into a moment where there's nothing going on. However, which way you said it, we can be in line at Whole Foods. And while we're waiting to to check out, what's the first thing we do? Pull out our smartphone and check or get on Facebook, whatever it is. And it's funny because I read it. I was at Whole Foods earlier that day that I read that, and I did that, and I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, talk about
Here I am.
Here I am, which pissed me off about this book, because I'm in this book too, and I'm not.
I wrote
in
it
this
for
book.
you.
Yeah.
But the thing is at some point, what's starting to happen is that people are realizing that what really feeds us and what really nourishes us is more and more out of alignment with the way we're living. And I'm very encouraged by the growing awareness and lack of satisfaction with our devices to bring us what we really need. One example of that is connection with other people. In the mid 80s, there was something like 11% self-reporting of loneliness, and now loneliness is at about 40%. For most people reporting that they feel lonely. And the more technology people are using, the more depression rates are rising, actually at a kind of alarming rate in our youth. And what we're finding is that the more time people spend online communicating, the more lonely that they are. And the less time we're spending face-to-face connecting, the less grounded in their relationships they feel, the less they feel they can rely on their relationships. There's a kind of inauthenticity in the relationships because they are what the media has shown us a relationship looks like. But what's happening is that it's not really working for us in a lot of ways. So what has to happen is someone has to get curious about, am I okay with every time I have 3 minutes to myself, I'm filling it? Am I okay with that? We have to come up against something that's not working. And for most people, it's just not feeling a sense of meaning in my life. That's where I'm seeing a crisis in meaning. That what is this supposed to mean? Yes, I have, endless choices on Netflix. Yes, I can stream anything. Yes, a product can get here in the morning. Yes, I can have a boyfriend when I swipe right. Yes, everything is possible, but nothing feels like it means anything. And that's what I'm seeing more and more in my practice. And that will lead us to questioning technology as a means to filling our deeper human needs. It is not the tool for that. And the other thing that I notice that's really creating kind of a crisis is that we have a culture right now of immediate gratification. As you know, everything should be available right now, and it should not be hard. Nothing should be hard. It should all be easy. I should be able to get what I want now and without any struggle. And of course, as we know, as generations older than the millennials, everything that brings satisfaction, joy, meaning comes from time and effort. Everything. And I really say that, consciously I use the word everything. And so we're in our infatuation with the immediate and the easy, we are actually denying ourselves the deeper experiences that bring nourishment to our lives. And it's same thing with relationships. Relationships don't happen overnight. They happen in the empty spaces. When we can't know an answer to something and we all kind of figure it out together, there's a relationship formed there. Now we just Google it. Somebody Googles it. That conversation is over. Relationships happen in these sort of quirky, odd, awkward ways, and certainly over time. But what's happening now, is that the kids are telling each other they love each other after, 3 or 4 texts. The communication is instantaneous and 24/7, but it's not built again on the hard parts and the awkwardness and working through stuff together. When that comes up, a lot of these kids are out. They move on to something easier. So the cost is the deep relationships, the deep friendships. So that's a concern.
Talking about relationships, you got to tell that story of this person from your book who was married to someone who she kind of fell out of love with, but wouldn't leave because you got to tell that story. That's really
this is more common. It's more common than you would realize. We rely on our technology right now. It feels like that keeps us in the stream of life. It's our umbilical cord. It really is. And for people who are really not tech savvy, there's a sense of absolute terror if they go offline or something goes wrong. And, you see people coming into the Genius bars, at the iStores, literally like in fight or flight. In true fight or flight, their eyes are bugging out of their head because they feel their entire connection to life is through this machine. And one of my clients stayed with a partner she really did not love for quite some time until, years later we could work through it, simply because he fixed her technology. He was useful for her when, she got viruses on her device, and she was quite upfront about it. She didn't want to figure out, and, despite all of the talk of there are consultants that can do that now and so on, her fear of having to kind of address that whole market and find someone through Craigslist, she was really frightened of technology, and just that he could keep her online and running kept the relationship going for years.
I don't know. It rings. It's horrible because it rings. That's really horrible. Oh my God.
Women and men too. They don't want to deal with that. In the past, it was perhaps the man could go out and make a living or had good genes or this or that. I cannot tell you how many people tell me that their partner, he's tech savvy. Usually it's a woman saying, he's tech savvy, or he can handle all of the electronics. And that's replaced, good gene pool or goes out and makes a good living.
Good. Or a good lover.
Good God.
Yeah.
Oh God, that's long gone.
Yeah, that's finished. Forget that.
One in five millennials checks their phone during sex. 1 in 10 of all Americans checks their phone during sex. 1 in 3 people would give up sex before their phones. So yeah, let go of the sex part.
That's gone. Oh God. And then since we're on to from the sublime to the ridiculous, what about the autocorrect stuff that happens to people on a day-to-day basis that you have in this?
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, it's just the larger question there, is we are relating to technology in a way that we've related to really nothing else that I've seen. And as I've studied, generations, in that we are turning over our authority. We are literally turning over our authority to an inanimate being called technology. I was in a car service recently, and it was pouring rain in New York, and we were going across at rush hour, a block that has a bridge at the end of it. And there were many ways, of course, that we could have gotten to the destination I was going. And of course, the big GPS is there in the middle. And I said to the human who's still there driving, I said, probably there's another route, given that this is a bridge street. This wouldn't be, after 40 years of living in New York City, I would say this is my experience teaches me, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And the one line you can imagine, right? GPS tells me this is the way to go. Done.
Period.
Conversation over. So we are turning over, and autocorrector is just one way, responsibility, if you will, for kind of our own well-being. So we send out a text, and we're perfectly okay if the autocorrector turns it into what it thinks we meant.
Yeah.
And all of the different, miscommunications that come of that. And then, of course, we're responding to the miscommunication. So then the autocorrector in some way is creating the dialogue, because then I have to sort of say, well, that's not what I meant. And then the person is upset because they think maybe it is what she said, blah, 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 blah. And, one of my favorites was one of my clients' friend who was quite suicidal and reached out to another therapist that I know whose name is Patty. And of course, for some reason, it changed it to Party. And so her response to his suicidal note was Party, and there's just all these crazy, crazy things that go on created by technology. And, people ask me if it's an addiction or if we're going to become addicts. And I always laugh because we are full on addicts. We have all the markers of addiction. We're giving up other aspects of our life that used to nourish us to use our substance. We go into full withdrawal of anxiety and depression. We continue using even though we know that it's doing negative things to aspects of our life. And some sneaky part of us knows we should probably not be in a bathroom stall checking. There's probably something wrong if, in the middle of a romantic dinner, we have the phone in between us and our partner. And yet we continue doing it even though we kind of know this is not really okay. Yeah. These are the only difference in this addiction, I would say, is that we've all drunk the Kool-Aid. We're all in.
Yeah.
We've agreed.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. That's the most horrible part of the whole damn thing. We are supporting each other's
That's right.
vast addiction.
In other addictions, at some point in the addiction, you become an outsider from society. You can't stay in your regular world with your addiction. But in this one, where are you going to go? You can leave the bar and not hang out with drinkers, but where are you going to go to hang out with non-techies?
Yeah, nowhere.
Even the caves have Wi-Fi now.
Oh, listen, I'll just tell you, this is a little bit out of school, but I go to India all the time. And in India, recently, last couple of years, met an extraordinary being, a jungle Baba, right?
Wow.
And he's young. He's early 40s. He's got a cell phone. Okay. I mean, and he is calling.
Perfect.
He can't always call from outside of the caves that he does years and years of practice in. He has to get to a Wi-Fi, before he can actually. But he's calling his devotees. They're calling. I've called him. Like, okay. That's how far it's all come.
Right. Well, in a sense, so here's the thing, though. It really is about finding freedom in technology, not from technology.
Big point.
It's about, we're not, as you know, spiritual practice is not about having the perfect sit where there's no noise and there's only good experiences and no thoughts interrupt. It's how do we work the practice in the realities of life, right? When your kids are banging on the door and your mind is a mess and all of that sort of stuff. What does it look like, boots on the ground? And so the question then becomes, how do we, every time we have one of these impulses, these hundreds and hundreds of thoughts per day. Oh, I could shop for shoes, I could check the weather. I could check the weather again, I could look up an old boyfriend, whatever the thing is, you wouldn't believe how many times a day they check the weather. You wouldn't even believe it.
All right, you're killing me now. I check the weather.
I know, 100, literally. I'm not kidding you. 100 times a day. Right? So I suggest to them, what about a window? You could just switch it up, one of them. But if we just start to catch the number of thoughts we have about, I could check out of this moment. And if I use that impulse, instead of collapsing into it and just following the impulse. And I used it to ask myself, what would I have to feel in this moment if I didn't use, or, what's here that I'm trying to distract myself from, or use the impulse as an opportunity to check into now. Then we can use this whole crazy thing that's going on as a way of becoming more awake, not going further under anesthesia.
Yeah.
Right? And there are all these encouraging new apps, and it seems like a wink and a nod. It seems paradoxical for me to say this, but apps that are making you realize how many times have you checked today, or maybe an app that actually allows a parent to shut off the apps that the child has until there's a deal made, until you do your homework. And then there are apps that say stop and turn everything off and guide you through a body meditation. Because one of the things that's happening is, as you know, most people are lost in their minds and in thoughts all day. And what technology does is it's like a cruise ship buffet for our mind. It's like heaven sent food for the mind that never ends. So some of the apps, instead of being more food and, another place to narrate our life, we already have a kind of built-in narrator that it's like having a biographer that walks 20 feet behind us. Oh, look what's happening in your life. Oh, look, you're having a good time right now. It's kind of telling you the story of your life that you're supposed to be living. And now, of course, with technology, we have a place to put that narration. Now, what do you think of what's happening in my life? Oh, and what do you think? Right? So instead of that being a handshake, we have these new technologies that are saying stop and actually check into your body, get out of your narration. So it may be that we end up, who knows, using technology to get a handle on technology.
Yeah. Well, I want to put a plug in right now for something that we do. This is the Be Here Now Network, the Ram Dass's Be Here Now Network, where we have all these wonderful teachers with all these wonderful podcasts. You should check it out yourself, because you're, I'm sure, quite well acquainted with Sharon Salzberg and some of the other people that we have. And
she wrote a nice blurb on the book.
Oh, yeah. That's great. She's the most wonderful person, and a longtime great, great friend. And anyhow, we put together an app. The Be Here Now Network released an app a couple of months ago. It's brand new, called the Heart Mind app. And in it, of course, you can get all these podcasts. This podcast we're doing will be on there as well. But it also has things like different meditations, short meditations that we push out at different parts of the day to help you stop your world for a moment. And just get into one thing, or even just Ram Dass going, be here now, be here now. Yeah. Just stop your day for a moment. So, and we have an in-app course that excerpted from called Life in Balance to help people in a day-to-day. So that's my little plug for
fantastic
the other side of this, which is, there is a positive side of this.
Well, and that's part of what makes it all so complicated, because, if it were just, I don't know, methamphetamines, you could probably say you could just do without it. There's not that much good in that. Maybe the first time, I don't know. We might have to, that's not my specialty, but there's so much good, in this opportunity that tech offers, that this is what makes it so darn complex, because it's about really coming from our more evolved self and not our reptilian self, and using discernment to say, well, what does work for me in this? What really feeds my deeper needs? What at the end of my life, will have felt like a life well lived, a life, in balance. If I spend the whole life on Snapchat and Instagram, at the end of this unbelievable thing we call existence, will that have been a life well spent? And so we have to ask the question with technology, what parts of it really feed our deeper human needs? And that's the question I'm really trying to kind of raise in the book, is nothing wrong with using technology. Um, but the way we're using it is really out of alignment with what makes for a good life.
Yeah.
And, the question again about our rejection of now, when, as when the mind is taken off duty, right? The mind experiences that as the end of existence, So when we're dropping into be here now, we're saying, drop all thoughts of future, drop all thoughts of past, just land, arrive here. And we don't judge it, but the mind goes into a panic state, a kind of a fight or flight. That's death. And so the more we can become aware that there are great benefits to dropping into here now, right? It's not just being a triathlete who can face death moment to moment, that it changes the meaning and the value and the way we experience life if we can land in the moment, even if it's drop in, And so there's an opportunity through technology to again raise this really important question of why is it important to be in our bodies in the moment that we're in? If we don't like the moment, why wouldn't we want to be in a virtual screen? Well, that's a great question, and that invites a great dialogue that is going to forever be of value.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that is really a question for the deepest part of our wounds or a topic, and that's around attention. And you have a chapter devoted to that in the book. But you say most everyone finds it difficult to allow the vulnerability that comes from exposing the parts of ourselves that we may consider unsavory or unlovable. It can be very scary to ask for what we really want and to communicate how we really feel, especially if it's not the way we think we should feel. And my own feeling around, and that's just part of it, and you go on, I'd like to talk more about, well, you say to admit that we sometimes need to be at the center of someone else's attention, not just a sidebar to their screen or to the dozen conversations they are conducting through their device, is an act of great courage. And I think, to me, part of what there is a deep fear of vulnerability and exposing ourselves to people, which is why when we first went to India, and it's Ram Dass's famous story of, when we sat with Neem Karoli Baba, and he sat with him, and he told him something nobody could know, so he thought, oh my God, he knows everything about me. So Ram Dass had all of these, this thought of all the horrible thoughts, and of course the self-deprecation that goes on with those thoughts. I am the worst piece of junk that ever lived because I am these thoughts, and so on. And as he, so he had those thoughts, and then he looked up, and Neem Karoli Baba, we called him Maharaji, was looking at him completely full-on love, like you are the most wonderful, pure being that lives in this universe. And then he knew, Ram Dass, at that point, that was the first experience he'd had of that unconditionality. And that unconditionality, to work towards that in our lives, and that's much of what we do at the Love Serve Remember Foundation, is really trying to reference that in all these different ways. But certainly through Ram Dass's thing is around loving awareness and doing that practice, so we identify with our spiritual hearts, whatever you want to call it. Buddhists would call it something else. And but I think that the fact of attention that we are getting from the technology, the attention that we desire, and the way that we cover our vulnerability, those two, the juxtaposition of those things is, I think, a really contributing factor to not wanting to go to that place of awareness so that we can allow it to be. And you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's really super important.
I think what you're saying is, really insightful there, because when when we get in touch with our own wounds, our own vulnerability, our own fears, right? That's the doorway to here now, right? That's the entry point. And in a sense, what we're using all of this running and chasing and feeding to do, I think you're spot on there, is to stay away from our deeper humanness, our I don't know, our vulnerabilities, our brokenheartedness, and the sad part in a way is that it's through our own compassion for ourselves, it's through our own heartbreaking for ourselves that we find, as Nisargadatta says, when I look out and I see that I am everything, we can't see that unless we go through the doorway of our own heart. And I look in, I see I am nothing, and I look out and I see that I am everything, and in between life moves, right? And the way we're using potential effects of this virtual technology is to keep things moving so quickly that we never get anywhere near our own sensitivity, our own real needs, and building up a thicker and thicker layer of expectation that is false, that is actually false for everyone, that this way of being is somehow okay or somehow in alignment with our real being. And so what you have is layers and layers now of inauthenticity and shame if we show that the emperor has no clothes, that the whole system is less and less built for human beings. It's like the system works for technology, but less and less for kind of what really matters to human beings. But we're joining again at a very strange time in history with this agreement that this is working for us, or this is okay, and moving farther and farther away from our own hearts. And so the best solution for that I always work with people on is the revolution starts here. It starts with our own awareness. When I say to somebody, very, very small way, like in the book, you can ask someone that you're close to put away their phone when you are with them for a meal. You can say, I'd like your full attention, right? And just that little bit of vulnerability, or admitting, yeah, I want all of you focused on me. Those are little moments to be the light in the darkness, to, be the sanity in an insane world, right?
Yep.
Because the way we're behaving, again, it denies us access to the real sense of connection to everyone.
Yeah. Someone once said, a writer, I believe, I can't remember her name, but I've quoted it more than once, I should. The most generous act that you can do with another person is to give them your full attention. Isn't that right?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's everything.
Now, to me, the core of the whole, you caught to me in the book the actual core issue, which we've talked about a little bit, but I want to read it because it is exactly what we all need to dig further into ourselves and reveal and understand. The desire to capture life is motivated primarily by fear. We are afraid that if we stop trying to capture life, to pin it down and prepare it to be remembered, often before it has ever happened, we will miss out on it or it will go away. We are afraid of the impermanence that is the very nature of life, the fact that every moment is born and then dies into the next. That nothing, not even our most memorable experiences, can be lived forever. In truth, we are always living with birth and death. And of course, sages for thousands of years have been admonishing us to really look into the impermanent nature of existence as a reality, so that we are not so fixed on those, particularly our thoughts and our bodies and so on, that leads us to pain, unhappiness, and suffering. And isn't this, Nancy, such a core reason that we have gone wild using this technology to exactly move away from that understanding? Because, as you say, the fear of being being in the moment, the fear of not being engaged in something that drags you outside yourself is so great that we don't want to have that awareness, basically.
Yes, and that's why I write a lot about that in the book, that at a deep level, technology is the denial of our mortality, the way we're using it. It is really, it is all about being hyper-focused on an object outside ourselves. People say that we're becoming unfocused, but I would say we're becoming hyper-focused, where we will always be in relationship with a something, right? Something. And that makes us feel somehow our own existence. Again, it's a kind of very primal drive when relating with an other or an object, a thought. There's an I and there's the something. And that makes us feel our own livingness, our own existence. But when we're talking about dropping into the moment and not engaging with a something, but just experiencing being on its own, right? That is generating a primal fear that we don't feel ourselves, the I that then is relating. And so we have this tool now that allows us to always be in relationship with a something and feeling our ego self, our mind, present, alive. And so the more we engage that way, the more frightened actually we become of being without an object to interact with. And so, it's interesting because in mindfulness, as you know, we are the witness who is watching the sensations, the thoughts, and so on. And then moving from mindfulness to more non-duality, then there becomes a kind of consciousness that is there, that is not in relation, it is not witnessing, it is not in that dualistic role anymore. And that's when, it sort of really opens up into a different experience of being, the non-localized self, right? The self that is not just watching, because what we've developed in this culture is a kind of ego-driven witness. So it's great, we're watching our thoughts, but it's another layer of the ego just kind of watching the thoughts.
Right.
So what you're talking about, what you're using technology really now is to move further and further and further away from the experience of true being, the real sense of just being without the I there defining everything.
Yeah.
But, one thing I want to say that's kind of hopeful, right, is that, again, this idea of our own participation in this, right? I don't want to lose that, because how we use this, if we get really curious about the way we're using technology, it can become our teacher. It can become the opportunity to practice. Just like a difficult relationship, relationship, when we recognize our partner as our spiritual teacher, then when the difficulty comes up, it's exciting because it's an opportunity to use it for quite the opposite, which is exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's other analogies of that as well. In this conversation I just had with Ram Dass, he suggested the exact same thing of people who have gone into a chaotic, angry, fear mode out of the new administration and the policies of the new president. Many people are suffering big time, as I'm sure you are hearing yourself. And he said just the exact same thing. Look at this as an opportunity to go inside yourself and clean up your house, your inner house, and see it as such.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's.
I love it. I love it for that reason. I feel like 50 times a day I get an opportunity to practice. When I think, "Ooh, I wonder what who was that actor in that film?" Oh. Sit with the not knowing. Let's see what your brain does with that. There are just so many opportunities to practice.
Yeah, right.
And what we're seeing, right, is just to say that again, to name it, is we're seeing technology is not doing this. We're seeing some of the nature of the human being, of the species, and the way we're using technology is just putting front and center are some of our more reptilian tendencies.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for this delightful hour. The power of off, it's all in there. And I encourage, because there isn't one person who's listening to this podcast or hears about this podcast and will listen to it that cannot use the wise view that Nancy has offered us through this book. So it's really fantastic. And Nancy, what about a website? People, I mean,
Sure.
I'm going to come to New York and I'm going to sign up for a little therapy on this myself. I'm sure there's going to be a big line on that one. So what?
Well, you'll be first.
Okay.
You'll be first in the line.
All right.
And your wife is worse, so maybe she should be first. But
don't say that.
I was going to say my website is nancycolier.com, and it's 1L. And if anybody, I give workshops on it, and it is certainly the problem of the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, all of this will be on Mindrolling on the page where this podcast will rest on the Be Here Now Network, BeHereNowNetwork.com. And we'll have Nancy's books there as well, which you can use our portal to go buy them on Amazon to give us a little support. That's our big commercial.
Buy them.
Yeah.
Go buy them.
And so.
And practice them. There's a detox in the book. Practice the detox.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. My delight. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week on Mindrolling.